We saw the initial reports out of China, hey, kids are not getting COVID. But then you have to look a little deeper. And I liken the analogy like, hey, on a rainy day when I keep my kids inside the house, they don't get wet. That's what we were doing early on in COVID. We were keeping the kids home. We were keeping them in the house. And yes, you don't get COVID if you're not going to the supermarket, if you're not going to work, if you're not going to the schools or these other areas. The one thing I do want to bring up, and I think this is what parents are getting quite upset about now, is children, like adults, may get COVID and then not be better in just a week or two, the long COVID that we've been hearing more and more about in adults. In adults, we say that's about 20%. Now, in children, it may be as high as 10%. So really think about what we hear long COVID in adults. We're seeing that spectrum in our kids as well. It could be headaches. Headaches are actually quite common in kids. It could be loss of taste and smell. It could be hair loss. Actually, I have to say a few of those cases have been really traumatic. You can imagine an adolescent and their hair starts falling out and not growing in. It could be challenges, this brain fog as we see in adults. We see that in kids also, having trouble concentrating in school. But really big stuff is the fatigue, the low energy. As children are trying to return to sports, as children are trying to do their virtual school. Kids are going out to play soccer and they're realizing, I can't run up and down a soccer field. What's going on? I had COVID a couple of months ago and I thought I was fine. Or the teacher calling and saying, hey, your son is not paying attention in school. What's happening? And the parent relating that, okay, a couple months ago, my son had COVID, but it was mild, but this long COVID. So I think that's really important when we think about children. We say, oh, don't worry, it's going to be mild. They're not going to die. They're not going to end up in the hospital. But they may have trouble doing sports. They may have trouble in school. So I think that's one of the components of COVID in children that we can't lose sight of. So we don't see long COVID just in people end up in the hospital. We don't see long COVID just in people that have severe disease. We sometimes see long COVID in adults and children who've been infected and maybe even had an asymptomatic first episode. So first thing is don't let your child get COVID, right? You can't develop long COVID. You can't have a post-COVID complication if you never had COVID. I think it's really important to put in perspective what we say about COVID in children. You put a child in the same proximity to someone with COVID, kids get COVID, kids spread COVID.